Hello, everyone. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublett, and welcome to Across the Sky, our national Lee Enterprises weather podcast. Lee Enterprises has print and digital operations in 77 locations across the country, including my home base in Richmond, Virginia. I'm here with my meteorology co-hosts from Across the Sky, Joe Martucci in Atlantic City and Matt Holliner in Chicago. Our colleague Kirsten Lang in Tulsa is out today. So let's go around the horn real quick. This is Thursday afternoon. We're 70 degrees and windy here, but I know for a fact, Matt Holliner in Chicago, it is not like that there.
No. 1 week ago, I was talking about, hey, there's another winter storm in Iowa and Wisconsin. If you were listening to last week's podcast, well, yes, this is a different podcast, but guess what? 1 week later, and there's another winter storm in Iowa and Wisconsin, and it was in Nebraska last night, just dumping snow again. And then once again, it looks like we're going to quiet out for the weekend, but then next week, it looks like, again, some uncertainty exactly where, but more snow coming back to the Midwest. So it does not stop. It has been a busy, busy winter, and I'm just so ready for some warmer temperatures and some sunshine.
La Nina's out to get everybody. Joe, have you gotten to 70 degrees yet, or are you still in the 60s there in Atlantic City?
Currently, we're in the 60s, though we did hit 70 one day in February. I have to get back on the exact day, but we did get to 70. But yeah, it's been balmy here. I don't have the windows open now because we have our wonderful guest coming on in a little bit, but I will have the windows open again after the podcast is done. But yeah, it's been warm, but it gets cooler as we go into the weekend, and kind of like Matt. So, we've kind of been in this pattern for the past couple of weeks where like the first half of the week is mild. Second half of the week's really mild. We get some kind of rain Thursday or Friday, and we go back to seasonable for like Saturday, maybe Sunday if we're lucky. And then we warm up again. I mean, that's pretty much been our pattern all month, and it'll be our pattern probably for the rest of the month as well. So kind of like Groundhog Day, wash, rinse, repeat with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. We've had this propensity, even though it's been warmer than normal ever since Christmas, that Sundays have been wet and or colder than normal. But as you said, it's been warm. This is our fifth day in the 70s this month. Of course, now the Super Bowl is over and we think about outdoor sports. Baseball is right around the corner. Pitchers and catchers have already reported in Florida and Arizona. Most of the position players will go in next week, February 20th, 21st. And of course, especially in the spring, weather can be volatile for baseball. And with that, we want to bring in our guest this week who knows all about it, a Detroit weather mainstay who's been consulting for the Tigers and other big-name sports really for a while now. Paul Gross has just recently retired from his day job, 40 years as a broadcast meteorologist at WDIV in Detroit, the NBC affiliate there. Paul, it is so great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us, bud.
It's great to be with you, my friend.
You've done so much additional work that isn't obvious. The forecasting, science communications. You're busy with the forensic meteorology business as well. And I do want to talk about that at another time. We want to have you back on later because that's some really interesting stuff. But let's start with the Tigers. How did your relationship with the Detroit Tigers and kind of advising them on weather situations, how did that get started?
Well, back in the 80s, before all of the proliferation of cable channels and all the sports channels and things, my station was the flagship station for the Detroit Tigers. We televised a whole bunch of their games. And so the grounds crew chief at the time, it was Frank Fennick, that was his name. He would call our weather office just to get an update on the weather if there was rain in the forecast. And I just happened to be the guy that was always answering the phone. And after a while, it just became kind of him and me always talking about the weather for the games. And it just has continued ever since. And it's really funny. Back in about the early 1990s, I don't know, maybe you guys are too young to remember a manager named Sparky Anderson.
Oh, no, I remember Sparky.
Okay. So the Hall of Fame legendary manager, Sparky Anderson, was our manager, and he happened to be in our station. He was there for an interview. He was promoting a charitable cause that he was in charge of. And I went out into the lobby to say hello to him, and I introduced myself, and I just said, I'm a meteorologist that talks to Frank Fennick all the time. And he must have misheard me because all he heard was Frank Fennick, and he just started going on and on about what a great grounds crew chief he is. And then he said, Paul, he said, Frank Fennick is the most respected grounds crew chief in the entire American League. The umpires, they love him. And I just said, why is that? And he said, because, Frank always has the best handle on the weather of any grounds crew chief. And I just looked at him and said, Sparky, who the hell do you think's been giving him the weather all these years? Come on, throw the dog a bone, And so, so it goes back to the mid 1980s.
That is wonderful. That's wonderful. Do you have one or two things that kind of stick in your head in terms of memorable events with the Tigers? Like there was a very close call or anything like that really sticks in your mind from your time advising them?
Well, sure. And again, there's two things that you have to be aware of if you're going to forecast weather for a baseball team. There's obviously the safety of the players and the field conditions and all of that. But then there's the safety of everybody in the stadium from things like lightning. And so there was one time we had a severe thunderstorm that was taking a direct bead on the ballpark. This is obviously a game was in progress. And when the storm was about maybe 15, 20 miles away, I told the grounds crew chief, and most of the time I'm on the phone with her, sometimes because I have half a set of season tickets. I mean, I'm at a lot of games. So sometimes I'm just with her. I'll just run down in either down to her office or behind home plate there and talk to her. But in this particular instance, I was on the phone with her and I'm saying this storm is going to be like hitting you and you're going to need to stop the game and get that tarp on before the storm hits because as you guys all know as meteorologists, the strongest wind gusts with a severe storm usually occurs out ahead of the start of the rain. And so I said, you need to convey this to the umpires. And she told him, but the umpire, he felt that he was God and he wasn't going to stop the game until it was Hurricane Ethel hitting. And so we're now, this storm is literally about 5-6 miles away. And I said, Heather, you've got to get this game stopped. You have to get this tarp on because if this storm hits with this wind, you're not going to be able to get that tarp on easily. I mean, you're talking about wind gusts that could be 60 miles an hour. And the umpire would not let her stop the game. He wouldn't stop the game. So, of course, the storm hits and the grounds crew is struggling like heck to try and get that tarp on. And some of the members of the grounds crew are trying to stand on the edges of the tarp so the guys could get the stakes in just to, stake it down. And this severe gust of wind came, whipped out the tarp from under her, and actually she tore up her knee, meniscus, ACL, MCL, and had to have surgery. Wow. So this umpire, he took matters into his own hands, and somebody got seriously injured as a result. And so that is the biggest close call. I actually it wasn't a close call. It was basically a worst case scenario.
Hey, Paul, so two questions for you. One's a funny question, though. First, now that you're retired from your day job, will you be spending some February and March days in Lakeland, Florida for spring training now?
You know what? A lot of people here have asked me, you're not leaving, are you? You're not moving, are you? I said, no. This is home. I have worked in my hometown for my entire career. So I'm blessed. And you guys know that is a rarity in our business. So I'm blessed and I'm thankful for that. So I'm actually, it's funny, in March, I'm actually going to be down there for a Tigers spring training game, but I'm not going to be spending time down there, during spring training, doing that with them. In fact, I don't think I've ever gotten a call from them down in Lakeland about a game, but I will be at a game this March though. I'm really excited about that. Spring training is a lot of fun.
Cool. I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan, so I will be in Sarasota in March for an Orioles spring training game. Looking forward to
Well,
that.
wait a minute. Hold on, because the Orioles, I'm trying to think, is the Orioles or is it Pittsburgh that they play in Bradenton? Where do the Orioles play?
They play in Sarasota.
In Sarasota. Okay, because we're going to a game, I think, in Bradenton. The Tigers are playing. I thought it was the Orioles, but I guess it's Pittsburgh. Actually, we're playing Pittsburgh, I think it is. So we're actually, because Lakeland is about an hour and a half drive from where we are.
Right.
So where we have a place down there, my mother-in-law she lives down there. So we're about an hour and a half from Lakeland. So we chose to go to a Tiger game over in Bradenton against Pittsburgh.
What day are you going to be there, Paul? Might have to meet up.
Well, we'll talk after the podcast.
We'll talk after. But my serious question is talking about lightning. So parlaying what you were talking about wind in terms of lightning. When we had Chris Budden on in our last podcast, who's an ESPN sideline reporter, she was explaining to us how the stadium has different lightning delay rules than the television networks will, and how that impacts things. So she was talking a bit more from the television side of things, but tell us from the operations and stadium side of things, what is your protocols for forecasting lightning one and then calling or pausing a game as a result?
Well, first of all, a lot of people think that I make the decision to pause or call a game. Nope. I just advise them on the weather. They make the decisions. And I will say, as you guys and we all know as meteorologists, lightning can hit 10 miles away from a storm. And so, I don't know what Major League Baseball's criteria is anymore because things have just changed over the years. But, if I see a storm with lightning and I know it's getting within that radius, I'll let them know. And then they will, they'll make their decisions, but obviously you can't have fans out in the stands exposed to lightning. That is just, lightning is one of the top weather killers in the nation, and you just don't hear about it as much because when lightning kills somebody, it's like maybe one person at a time. And if, somebody 1,000, 1,500 miles away dies from a lightning strike, you probably never hear about it in the news, but unless there's video. And then of course, if there's video, then everybody knows about it. But the bottom line is that lightning is a very significant weather killer, and it is something that's very important. It can't be taken for granted. And so I will be very strong in my messaging if I know that lightning is approaching within a certain radius. And easily for me, that radius is within 10 miles.
Hey, Paul, I love hearing your stories because I have a very similar experience. Back when I was at Fox 19 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the whole weather team, we actually worked with the Cincinnati Reds, doing the same thing you were, talking to them about what the rain situation is and consulting with them for games. And I tell you what, boy, what struck me during my time when I was talking with them is how important timing is. When as a broadcast meteorologist, we always show the hour by hour forecast. Well, it suddenly becomes more than just hour by hour. We're talking about minutes. And when you tell them it's going to start raining in 30 minutes, that really matters because they need that time in order to get ready and get the preparation. And also what struck me is, being so interesting is they will sometimes want to delay a game if the rain is not there yet because they don't want to start a pitcher and then have to pull him and have a rain delay after he starts. So they would rather delay the game and wait for the rain to pass and then start the game late. That was one of the things that struck me. Is that something that occurs in Detroit as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They don't want to burn a pitcher. If a pitcher warms up and they need like a good half hour to warm up, if a pitcher warms up and then if you play into the second inning and then all of a sudden you have a 45-minute hour rain delay, most managers are not going to be restarting that starting pitcher. Most managers are going to have to start going to the bullpen. So now here's something a lot of people don't know. In most instances, the decision to start the game, we're talking before the first pitch, the decision to start the game is usually the home team general manager's decision. Now, there are some games where Major League Baseball usurps the home team general manager and they make the decision. Like if it's the last game that they will see a particular team for the entire season, or maybe there's a major TV viewership and something along those lines. So on like maybe it's the national game of the week or something like that. So usually though, the home team general manager will make the decision to start or to not start the game. And I know that there was a game the Tigers once played in Boston, and Justin Verlander, the future Hall of Famer, was on the mound for us. And there was a massive rain area heading toward Boston. It was going to be at least 6-8 hours of rain, and there was not a snowball's chance in where that they were going to get this game played to its completion. But they started the game anyway, and Verlander maybe pitched into the third inning, and then the rain came in, and they had to call for the tarp, and they waited for like 2-3 hours, and of course they couldn't play the game, and so the Red Sox didn't have to see our best pitcher. Now I do not know who made that decision, whether it was the home team general manager or if it was the umpires, but it was, there was no question that because of the weather, the Red Sox in that series did not have to see our best pitcher. So maybe there is some gamesmanship. I don't know how that plays out across Major League Baseball.
See, that's interesting to me because I would not have thought that. I would have thought the decision for first pitch stayed with the umpire. But this goes back to the whole thing anyway, because I think Jason over the Washington Post about he's commented on this. My friend Matt Lanza down in Houston has commented that Major League Baseball, as a general rule, needs to do a better job of listening to the Weather Enterprise before they move forward on games. I mean, is this something that, in your mind, having done this for a long time, is starting to get better? Or is it just, or are they kind of in this mindset of like, no, when it happens, and then we'll take care of it? Is that something you're even comfortable commenting on?
Well, I really can't, because I'm not in their heads.
Okay.
Everything is speculation. And I, listen, we're all scientists here, and I just deal in facts. I don't judge unless I know the facts. I don't know all the facts, so I'm not going to indict anybody. But I will just say that, there are some umpires. There was an umpire named Dale Scott who, man, I'll tell you, whenever he was doing our games, he was the crew chief. And whenever he did our games in Detroit, I knew he listened to me. He would take everything that I had to say under consideration. I mean, there were times where I was at the game and I would be meeting with the umpires, in the umpire room. And he would understand exactly. I just laid it all out for him. And, okay, listen, this line of storms is going to come through. It's going to be, half an hour tops of like rain, but then you have the lightning threat on either side of it. So maybe you're going to be stopped for, an hour or whatever I would tell him. And he would understand that, and he would take it all in stride, and he would proactively let the grounds crew, stop the game, let them tarp before the weather comes in. But then there were other umpires, as I've already explained, that they don't listen. They feel that they know the weather better than I do. And it is what it is. But
so you're saying it's more like a case by case or game by game basis, this city, that city. There's not an overarching idea from MLB on the way to handle this, fair or not, but there's no like overarching idea. It's kind of really handled very much at the local level. Would that be good? A good assumption?
Frequently it is. Again, before that first pitch, it's generally handled at the local level, meaning either the home team general manager or the umpire. I don't know. I think only in the national games of national interest, where we're, talking about the World Series, the playoffs, the All-Star Game, things like that. Only then, I think, does Major League Baseball at the national level get involved in those decisions.
Got it. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about All-Star stuff, including the 2005 All-Star Game. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Paul Gross on the Across the Sky podcast. And welcome back to the Across the Sky podcast. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublett from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Our old friend Paul Gross from Detroit is joining us to talk about weather and sports and baseball in particular. Paul, please tell us a little bit about the 2005 All-Star Game. I know you've been itching to tell us about this one.
That's one of the most prominent, fun, memorable stories of my entire career. So first of all, my wife and I, we had the tickets to the game. Again, being season ticket holders for the Tigers, we had first access at All-Star Game tickets. So of course we were going to, be at the All-Star Game, and those tickets were not cheap. They were like $250, at least at that time. And so we had 4 seats. We have 4 seats. So we had one of my sons and then a cousin from Chicago came in for the game. He's a huge baseball fan. So the game was going to be mostly dry. And I had told them that toward the end of the game, 8th or 9th inning, there was the chance for a shower. I wouldn't expect it to be anything that would rain out the game or anything, but there was the chance for a shower. Well, Bud Selig was a bit of a nervous type with the weather. He was the commissioner of baseball at that time. And like around the second inning or so, the grounds crew chief calls me and said, "Hey, can you come on down to the behind the tunnel to talk to the commissioner?" Yeah, sure. So I went down there and I just said, "There's nothing on radar right now. I mean, we're fine till the end of the game. So just, don't worry." And so I went back to my seat, and then like probably about the end of the 3rd inning, she calls again and says, "Hey, the commissioner wants to talk to you again. Can you come back down?" And I'm thinking, okay, fine. So I go back down, and this time he asks me basically to be chained to his hip for the rest of the game. And so now I've paid $250 for that seat, and I'm now not able to watch the All-Star Game. And so I told him there's nothing going on. I'm watching a couple of showers across Lake Erie here. We had an upper low to the south. So with the counterclockwise circulation, the showers are actually coming in from the east. And so, which is a very unusual direction. And he was, of course, formerly, I believe, the general manager of the Milwaukee Brewers. So he was very into the weather and so he was very weather not savvy, I want to call it, but he was in tune to the weather. So anyhow, so finally we're now getting later in the game, and there's this one little shower that looks like it has a bead right on downtown Detroit coming across Lake Erie. And I'm just explaining, listen, it's going to pour, but for like 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, you're not going to stop the game for this. It's going to be like 2 or 3 minutes. And so in the middle of the 8th inning, Heather, the grounds crew chief, and I decide we need to let Joe West, Country Joe West, who just retired after setting the record for most games ever umped by an umpire. He was the crew chief and he was the home plate umpire. We had to go out and let him know what was going on. So as soon as the inning ends, we go walking out, and he, for some reason, usually they just toss a ball out to the mound, but he decided to walk out to the mound to put the ball down. So we're kind of chasing after him, and we finally meet him around the pitcher's mound. So I brief him about the weather, and then it's all business. I'm just telling him exactly what's going to happen. He goes, "How long is this rain going to last?" And I said, we're looking at like 3 minutes. I mean, it's going to be less than 5 minutes. It's going to come down pretty good, but it's going to be less than 5 minutes, start to finish. And he said, "All right, we're going to play through it." And Country Joe would play through anything anyway. But so we're starting to walk back, and all of a sudden I realize I am standing in the middle of the infield at the 2005 Major League Baseball All-Star Game. And so as I'm walking back, I take one look into the American League dugout, and I see all those All-Stars, the greatest players in the game, and I'm just thinking, my gosh, what an experience. And so so that's, I mean, and sure enough, the shower hit right on schedule, less than 5 minutes. And the funny thing is, the 8th and 9th, the 9th inning was played fairly quickly. So the shower actually started when Bud Selig walked out to hand the, I think the MVP trophy, to do that award after the game. So it rained on Bud Selig, but not as much the players in the 9th inning.
Hey, Paul, so like going back from 2005, compared to now, tell us just about the increase in technology and how it's helped you or maybe even hurt you in terms of forecasting the weather, because I'm curious how you were tracking even those showers back in 2005. I have to imagine you didn't have a smartphone app to look at radar scope or something.
Well, no, we didn't have radar scope, but what I did was I logged into, I forget even what website it was. It was a website, maybe it was something, maybe it was the our weather company's website, whatever. In any event, there was a computer with internet access in the umpire's room, and I had that radar booted up. And so I was tracking it on a computer in the umpire's room. And so, but it's not just also the radar, but it's also even the computer models have gotten so much better, because in the 2006 World Series, which the Tigers were in, we had a big rainstorm coming, and I told them this thing was going to start like within an hour of the end of game 1, and it was going to end around the beginning of game 2. And we literally were going to be 24 hours of rain in between 2 World Series games. And that's exactly what happened. And again, the models had that, just spot on. That one was spot on. We got both games started on time, and so it's also the models, but yes, radar, it just, again, being able to show the umpire literally on my phone, showing the radar imagery, it's just great. It's just great.
I do want to do a little bit of football, and I want to let Matt do that. But before we leave baseball entirely, can you talk a little bit about weather's impact on the game itself regarding the flight of the ball? Not just, it's windy, the ball's going out, but, when it's humid and these kinds of things that some people kind of forget.
The biggest misconception that people have is that when it's real hot and real humid, when it's real sticky outside, people, in fact, you've heard people say, "Oh, the air is so heavy today." But it's just the opposite. Water vapor molecules are lighter than air molecules. And so when you have more water vapor in the atmosphere, the air is less dense. So on a humid day, the ball is going to carry farther. And on a colder, drier day, the ball actually will meet a little more resistance from the air. So you'll hear from people. Sometimes you'll hear even ball players or even broadcasters say, "Oh, it's a warm, humid night. The ball's really going to be flying tonight." And that's true, because the less dense air lets the ball travel a little farther. And you all know in Denver, being the higher altitude, the air is just thinner. And so balls fly out of that ballpark just because the lower air density, just because of the altitude.
Yeah, now I want to talk about your experience with Michigan football. What is your best University of Michigan football weather story?
Well, I've got a good one. And then, by the way, I went to the University of Michigan, so it's my alma mater. I'd love to help them out. And we had a game where the Wolverines were playing at Colorado. And this is a very strange situation for Colorado, but a tropical storm had actually, a good-sized tropical storm, had actually crossed the Baja Peninsula of Mexico, was heading northeast, and this little ball of lots of rain was heading right toward Denver. And I had told Coach Lloyd Carr during the week, this is going to be a close call. This is, going to be probably it's either going to hit late in the fourth quarter or perhaps within an hour of the end of the game, but it is going to be a real close call. But most of the game would be dry, but just, if this thing speeds up by just an hour, which is like nothing on our maps, this could impact the end of the game. And so here it is now, that's Saturday, and I was actually covering for our weekend meteorologist. So I was driving into work, okay, and I'm listening to the game on the radio. And the two broadcasters, Frank Beckman and Jim Brandstatter, were talking about, sky's starting to get a little dark here to the west. And there's like about maybe 6-7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. So, yeah, the sky's getting kind of dark there to the west. And I'm getting real nervous. I'm driving in. And then a few minutes later, oh, did you see there's lightning? Jim, did you see that lightning? And so now there's lightning back to the west. And I'm thinking, God, hold off. And sure enough, the downpour held off till just after the end of the game. And it was at that point, I think, that Lloyd Carr told me in a note to me, he said, I call you, when I talk about you to the team, I call you my pipeline to God. And that's I tell you, one of the nicest compliments I ever got. But that was one that worked out really, really well. And there have been stories like I won with the Detroit Lions, if you want it, where it didn't work out, but most of the time it works out pretty well.
Yeah, talk about the Lions, because for the longest time they were playing inside and then they moved back outside again. So I would imagine that's something that's come along more recently.
Well, they still play in a dome, but they play away games that are obviously in some places that are outdoors. So they're very interested in the weather for those games. And then obviously sometimes even for practices, if they do outdoor practices, which they do frequently. But now there was this one game in Philadelphia where I was expecting some snow showers to develop during the second half. And all of a sudden, like about 15 minutes before game time, the Lions director of communications texts me a photo. The field is white, and he says, "Here, take a look at this." And I'm like, "Holy crap!" And what happened was this little snow squall developed, and it was like just a little line. I don't even remember all the specifics of the setup, but this snow squall had developed right over the stadium, and nobody else was getting on either side of it. And they were getting, they already had like an inch or two of snow before the game even started. So that was, that's one that I missed. And to this day, I don't recall ever figuring out why that squall developed just right over the stadium. But there was one other game where the Lions were playing at Chicago, and I told them you were going to have a west wind blowing straight up the field at like 30 to 40 miles an hour. They were going to have a screaming wind, and the game ended in a tie. They had to go to overtime. And there was a coin toss. And as you know, you can choose the ball or you can choose to defer. And so Marty Morningwig, our coach, he, I guess, saw that nobody had actually scored during the game playing into the wind. So instead of taking the ball, because, it's sudden death in those days, whoever scores first wins, he took the wind. And of course, the Bears had the ball first and they took the ball down the field. They scored and they won. And for years, people thought that I told him to take the wind. And it's like, no. I told him about the weather. I do not make the coaching decisions. But for years, people actually asked me. They thought I told him to take the wind in overtime. They were trying to put that loss on me.
I know exactly what you're talking about with my experience with the Reds. Fortunately, I was not the one that made the decision. I just told them what the weather situation was, and they always made the call on delaying the game and what move they were going to make, when to pull the tarp. I was just the consultant. I'm glad, because you forget like how much is at stake. All the people, the thousands of people in that stadium, and having to shut down those concession stands, all the money at stake that could be potentially lost when it comes to starting pitchers, and then the outcome of the game potentially being impacted. It's like, I'm glad I'm not the one who ultimately makes the call, but at the same time, I always wanted to make sure that what the information I was given was the very best, because I knew what a high stakes situation it was. So those were always, I mean, it was a lot of fun, but also stressful at the same time while I was doing it. But it was definitely a memorable experience.
Well, Matt, to that point, and again, Paul, I want to ask both of y'all this while we're on this topic, because we're in the business of saying this is what to expect. You have to make a decision. All right. But did you ever, and if so, how frequently, have somebody, one of these decision makers, go, well, what would you do? I mean, would that happen? Does that happen much?
I've had the question asked to me, usually just by the grounds crew chief, because again, she's not making the decision either. So, when I'm on the phone with her, she's just conveying it, to somebody. But I've told her, I said, me personally, Heather, I just wouldn't even start this game. I've actually said that. And by the way, at least I'm seeing it with the Detroit Tigers. I don't know if this is across all of Major League Baseball, but I am seeing at least a little bit of a consideration toward inconvenience to the fans. So, for example, let's say it looks like we're going to have rain moving in, and it's like 38 degrees. And and there's just like no way we're going to play this game. There are some teams that would literally wait and wait and wait. And after two hours, they say, okay, we're going to call this thing. There's no way we're going to play. But I've actually seen some games where they have called the game early, like before the game time. They've called the game at like an hour or two before game time, even 3 hours before game time, when I've been very certain about this large area of rain coming in, and it's very cold. It would be miserable for the fans, potentially dangerous for the players with pulled muscles and a wet field and a cold field and things like that. And so I've actually seen them kind of proactively call a few games, just figuring, why should these people all come on downtown, sit in these miserable conditions for 2 or 3 hours, and then be told we're not going to play? So I've actually seen a little bit of proactiveness on occasion.
And one thing from my experience was, I would talk to the grounds crew. I would talk to the operations manager. I even talked to the president of the Reds once. That was, again, you're talking to some people like high up there. It's like, wow, this guy actually wants to talk to me, wants to know what the weather situation is. But one thing I never did, because they didn't want me to, was to actually talk to the players. They said, don't communicate the information with the players, because they don't want their mindset to be altered about the potential for any rain delays. They want the coaches to be communicating that. They don't want to affect the players. So they said the players might come to you and look for information, but don't give anything. I was like, if a player comes to me and asks me a question, I don't think I'm going to answer them. But fortunately, they kind of kept us separate. We had one of the areas that we stayed like during the games was actually behind the home plate dugout. So the players are very close by, but we were in a separate room. We're not staying next to the players. So I never communicated with the players. And that was something they definitely did not want us to do, because they didn't want that to affect the feel of the team and the vibe of the team and how they were warming up or anything like that. So again, all these little things, it was such a unique experience.
In terms of a mentality between football and baseball, how do you have to approach, forecasting and, dealing with, employees and grounds crews? Do you find, is football a little more aggressive with weather than baseball? Is it vice versa? Tell us about the mentality you have between the two sports.
Well, obviously, the weather is going to affect the play of both sports. Now, there is a different mentality. Actually, it's a very good word for different mentality between the sports, because football will be played in adverse weather. And as long as there is no danger like lightning or anything like that, they'll play in almost anything. Now, obviously, you can have, like we saw this just this past season with Buffalo, where they moved the Bills game actually to Detroit because they were expecting, I think, 3 feet of snow. And so you can have a situation where obviously you can't play a football game. But as you all know, guys, that is very rare. They will, again, unless there's a safety factor, that, it can be just heavy rain and just a soup on the field, but they're going to play. Now, in baseball, it's the opposite. I mean, they will play in some rain, and listen, was it last year or the year before? I was at opening day and I saw Miguel Cabrera hit a home run in a blinding snow squall. I mean, we had a snow shower that came across. I mean, it's a very famous photo. Go Google it. It was opening day, one of the last 2 years. Miguel Cabrera, you see him hit this home run, and you see these big snowflakes, and it's like this big snow squall that suddenly, passed overhead. And so, again, in baseball, they'll play in some weather, but when the field starts getting too wet, then it becomes a real safety factor, or at least it's deemed more of a safety factor for the players. And so there's, I think, a lower threshold of weather for baseball than there is for football. In fact, not I think, there is a lower threshold of what they will tolerate. Because football, it's an outdoor game, and they will play, they'll play in pretty bad weather as long as it's not deemed dangerous.
Yeah, I remember even, as a kid growing up, we would love to play football in the snow. We don't see it as much anymore, but there was always something exciting to playing football in the snow. Rain, not so much, but there was always something a little more fun, a little more interesting about playing football in the snow. And I kind of missed that a little bit. Paul, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this week. Very much appreciate it. So what's going to be keeping you busy meteorologically now that you're off the air? Just more forensic stuff, more consulting. What else are you going to be doing?
Well, the forensic stuff was something that I always was going to do in retirement anyway, retirement from the TV station, because I love weather, I love history. And so when I'm asked to research past weather, that is a great love of mine. So I will continue consulting with attorneys, and I testify as an expert witness. And I've been doing that for 37 years, so that's going to continue. And then otherwise, just my hobbies. And so I'll be plenty busy in the meteorological community. Again, I'll still do my helping out with sports teams, and I'll still be very active on social media, advising people when big weather events are coming and things like that. But yeah, the forensic work is going to be something that will keep me quite busy.
I don't doubt that for a minute. Weather's very, very important to the insurance industry. We'll talk about that next time we have you on. But real quick, where can people find you on social media?
It's Gross Weather, GROSSWEATHER. So it's Gross Weather, and I don't know if you caught the pun there, but in any event, that's where people find me, Instagram or Twitter. Yeah.
Terrific. Paul, again, thanks so much for joining us, and we will talk with you again soon. We'll take a quick break, everybody, with Tony Rice's astronomy report and some closing thoughts on the Across the Sky podcast.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Venus and Jupiter continue to draw closer in the evening sky. Look after sunset, and you'll first see bright Venus appear, followed shortly by Jupiter up and a bit to the left. On Wednesday, February 22nd, the moon's going to pass through about a degree of angular separation from Jupiter, or about the width of your pinky. The moon also continues its march through the sky when on Monday evening, the 27th, it will pass Mars, also within about a degree. Now, Jupiter and Venus will continue to draw closer through mid-next week, when on the evening of Thursday, March 2nd, they'll be separated by about half a degree. So take a moment over the next few evenings and watch that separation disappear. Also notice how much brighter Venus is than Jupiter. Astronomers use a logarithmic scale to measure apparent brightness. Smaller numbers are brighter, and it's all based around first magnitude stars or planets or whatever being about 100 times brighter than sixth magnitude stars. For comparison, your eyes under the darkest skies are capable of seeing about a 7th magnitude star. Space telescopes like the Hubble and the James Webb, well, they can make out objects dimmer than 30th magnitude. Over the next few weeks, Jupiter will be shining at a negative 2.1 and Venus around a negative 4, or about 5 times brighter. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
And thanks again to Tony Rice for this week's astronomy report. Wrapping things up for this week, I just love being able to talk to people about this intersection of weather and sports, especially baseball and football, the two big, outdoor sports that are out there. And because this is one of these things that I alluded to it before, that baseball as a whole could do a little bit better with weather, but it does sound like it's moving in the right direction. But I did find it interesting that that this isn't an overarching thing with Major League Baseball, that it's still very much handled on a case-by-case, game-by-game, and city-by-city basis.
Yeah, I before I used to work here, I used to work in weather consulting. I think I said this last week. And we had clients in MLB, and we had NFL, and we had Major League Soccer as well. And we provided information, but they made the decisions, which is fine. I mean, that's our that was our job, and that's the way it is. But I believe it also paints a bigger picture of weather communication, and whether or not, no pun intended, are we saying the right things? Are we making the right points, to the decision makers? Are the decision makers understanding what we're saying? There's times, and we see it all the time, I think, where, sometimes decision makers could be a little better with the way we interpret weather data, and that could, play a role into whether or not a game is postponed or canceled or it's going to go on. But I thought that story Paul had with that little tiny shower that was rolling into the park across the lake, and having the commissioner, Bud Selig, asking him to be with him the whole game was pretty funny, because, those 3-minute showers can be awfully daunting if you're at a baseball game and you see that shower for 3 minutes, and how many minutes do you sit out there before you're just like, I'm done with this, I'm leaving. So, I would say for me personally, it might just be 3 minutes. If I wasn't looking at a radar or anything, I was just, sitting there, I'd say 3 minutes, is that cusp where I'd be like, all right, I got to maybe make some moves and get out of here.
I tell you what, I was consulting with the Reds. It was all about radar scope. Man, that was what I was glued to during the game when we knew there was a chance of rain, just watching and looking for any kind of pattern. And it was also because not only was it the track that the rain was going and how quickly the rain was moving, but also the intensity of the rain. You had to keep an eye on that, because if the rain is light enough, they'll play through it. But if it starts to pick up intensely, like when you start to see those yellow shades on the radar instead of just the green, when those DBZs gets a little bit higher, then it becomes more of an issue. So I was glued to radar scope, and actually, it was kind of a learning process for, the grounds crew there. I showed them the app. I would show them what I was looking at on my radar, and, they did have another consulting firm that they would go to for weather information, but what they loved was being able to see it and have me explain it to them right there. I could show them on the screen what we were dealing with, rather than calling somebody on the phone and asking them, hey, what are you seeing on radar? I could actually show it. Heck, here, this is what we're watching. This is what we need to keep an eye on. So being able to have that visual right there, radar scope, man, I can't imagine what Paul was doing before radar scope, because that was so huge when I was working with the Reds. So that is just, again, I think we've talked about it before on this episode, but radar scope, that is the ultimate meteorologist app. Yeah,
I don't know a meteorologist who doesn't have it. I mean, it's raw, unfiltered data, and you get to interpret it the way you were brought up to interpret it. All right, so great. That's going to do it for this week. I appreciate Paul Gross for joining us. Lots of great episodes to come. We've been kind of nudging through and finding some things about pollen and greening up as we get into the spring. Joe, have you talked to you talked to the folks at National Phenology Network, Teresa there?
Yes, we did. We're going to have her come on in a few weeks. She'll be on our March 13th episode of the Across the Sky podcast. We also have someone from the National Severe Storms Laboratory coming up the week before that on March the 2nd. Our February 27th guest is to be determined. We're going to find that very quickly. We have a few ideas in mind, and you will be liking it. We'll do something timely. It's the end of February. We're getting out of winter into spring, although some of us have kind of just felt like we've been in spring since the new year, but we'll get into it. But it was great to have Paul on this week, and congratulations on a 40-year career in pretty much one city.
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare to work your entire career, not just in one city, but the fact he was in his hometown his entire career. And I don't know anybody else who can say that. Anybody I've met. So many people I know have moved around, or they had to move a couple places and then just stayed put. So that's a real testament to the quality of work that Paul has done during his career there for the people in Detroit and across Michigan. All right, so with that, we're going to say goodbye for this week. So thank you for joining us on the Across the Sky podcast, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.